So beyond the urgent and indispensable need for humanitarian assistance, there needs to be a proper needs assessment. As stated in the Lugano Declaration, Ukraine and its people have the lead. This requires a domestic clarification of the roles and responsibilities of state bodies, such as the parliament, regional and local authorities, and Ukraine's vibrant civil society. Last Thursday in Kiev, I was able to meet a group of motivated and skilled young people. They represented different organizations, including this year's Nobel Peace Prize winners, the Center for Civil Liberties. I was impressed by how committed they are to their country and how eager to challenge that requires trust. The same trust that the international community needs in order to participate in financing the process. We must be effective and efficient out of a sense of duty to the people of Ukraine, but also to be accountable to our own citizens who make these funds available directly or indirectly through international institutions. We must not fail. Various actors such as the World Bank, the EBRD and the OECD, represented here by Secretary General Corman, have produced excellent analysis and reports. Today's expert conference is another important step. It allows us to share the knowledge gained and to deepen it. Ladies and gentlemen, Switzerland remains a dependable partner. We are focusing on efforts on those areas where our added value is the biggest and where our expertise is most useful. As a neutral country, we do not supply weapons. But our legal obligation in respect of neutrality do not in any way imply indifference to the violent violation of international law and to those values we defend, such as freedom and the right of people to live under a peaceful and just international order. My country stands firmly on the side of international law and recognizes the territorial integrity and national sovereignty of Ukraine. I expect today's conference to make a concrete contribution to defining a successful reconstruction process. For this, we need to draw on solid evidence and lessons from the past. I am confident that today's discussion will be fruitful. Let's get to work. Switzerland has rolled up its sleeves and is firmly on board. You can count on us. Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you so much for underscoring the power of hope, the importance of trust, and the need for Ukraine to lead its recovery. Speaking of leadership, I am delighted to welcome that Poland has provided not only in security, but also in humanitarian support to the many who are
one persona very well known in Germany and German history, General Clausewitz, once said that the war is a continuation other means are also very, very important. And the war in Ukraine, the battlefield, the cruelties which were shown to us yet again by Denis a minute ago, but also other fields which we sometimes forget about, like cyberspace, like Russian propaganda and fake news, or on the field of economy. Putin tailors his battle tactics to the opponent in question. He could not conquer Europe militarily if he didn't first defeat it economically. So today, Ukraine is fighting for its independence and the protection of our borders and our security as well. But the real struggle for European sovereignty is also taking place elsewhere on this economic and natural resources related battlefield. We often talk about Europe's dependence on Russian raw materials, and indeed Russia has behaved like a drug dealer who gives his first dose for free because he knows that the addict will come later on and will pay very dearly for next doses. Today, it is not enough to talk about the reconstruction of Ukraine and reconstruction of Europe. It's more than that. We have to talk about reshaping of Europe and European policies like energy policy and climate policy as well. I remember in the early 90s, Bill Clinton once said, "It's the economy, stupid." It was the time when we all believed that money will solve all the issues and it's enough to focus exclusively on economy. Now the struggle in Ukraine, the battle for freedom in Ukraine has awakened all of us to the other perspective, geopolitical perspective. The situation in Ukraine has awakened all of us from this geopolitical slumber. In a perfect market, the cheapest solutions are usually chosen, but perfect markets are usually only in outdated economic textbooks. In real markets, the cheapest solution often comes with hidden price, and cooperation between Europe and Russia seemed cheap and effective until Putin built it accordingly. It was supposed to be only gas contracts, but it turned out that Europe signed a pact for its very soul. From a Russian point of view, Vladimir Putin made a mistake, in my opinion, when he attacked Ukraine. From the Russian point of view, I emphasize this, because I'm sure he would have won the war against Europe, or he could have had higher chances to win the war against Europe, had he first continued to make it more dependent, to make Europe more dependent. The heroic struggle of the Ukrainian people has not only saved Ukraine itself, but it has also awakened many countries from our geopolitical slumber, or from their geopolitical slumber. For at least two reasons, Ukraine should be supported militarily and financially. And please bear in mind also this second component. I speak about this very, very often with Denis and with President Zelensky. Financial support, indeed, as President von der Leyen emphasized, is critically important, not only for the next couple of months, but also for the entire 2023, to show that we are determined enough to support Ukraine. Therefore, I'm going to thank Ursula, but also Kristalina, who is with us, and Werner and the other institutions, so EIB, International Monetary Fund, and other international institutions who are aware of this, that we have to collectively gather 3 to 5 billion euros per month to give hope for Ukraine that they are not going to be left alone. Secondly, the struggle, the fight in Ukraine is important because supporting Ukraine is the best guarantee for our own security and for securing peace for decades to come. Anyone who does not support Ukraine today has either betrayed our values of our civilization, or is fooled by Russia, or sometimes both. Or sometimes it's the Russian propaganda, of course, which is so successful, as I indicated at the beginning. Victory in the fight against Russia is closer not only thanks to the series of military successes of the Ukrainian army, not only because the Russian bear is tired of sanctions, and sanctions packages are beginning to work more and more effectively, but also because of the large part of Western world has shown determination and tenacity. And in order to win the war against Russia, we must build completely new security architecture as well in the political and economic dimension. First, the economic reconstruction of Ukraine is a crucial condition for Europe's safety. Ukraine is our stronghold today, and investment in strengthening it is our duty in a moral sense and in terms of real hard politics. At the same time, reconstruction must mean transformation. We must be guided by the principle build back better. Secondly, we must make sure that the offender pays for reconstruction. Russia should pay Ukraine war damages, war reparations. Too many times over the course of history we saw that the aggressors avoided consequences, avoided responsibility. And it was not mentioned today, so I'm going to emphasize that there is a huge pot of gold to be taken and dedicated for Ukraine's reconstruction, which is Russian assets of Russia Federation and Russian oligarchs. They are frozen in Switzerland and in many other countries all over Europe and the globe. But freezing means really not too much. Frozen assets can increase in value in several years or in 2 years' time. They have to be confiscated, and the money should be dedicated for reconstruction of Ukraine. Thirdly, we must vigorously carry on working on the process of Ukraine's integration in the EU. This is critically important. For peace has its price, so it's time to stop deluding ourselves that we will remain safe without investing in defense. Poland is dedicating 3 percentage points of our GDP on defense, and we are going to increase this amount of money even further. And the fifth point is the time for a great reorientation of energy policy. That's probably for another conference, but I'm going to signal this as well. The truth is we have no choice. Either we make the effort that independence requires, or we will pay for freedom with blood. When it comes to military support, it is proportionately the second largest army. We allocated almost 1 percentage point of our GDP to support Ukraine financially, humanitarian help, and from the point of military support, weapon delivery. So let me conclude with some final remarks. The policy of appeasing Russia is bankrupt, and everyone who is still trying to enact it drags Europe down. There are no errors then that cannot be repaired. When I hear Madame von der Leyen say that our government, Poland, was right about Russia and Ukraine, I feel a sense of satisfaction. But I would forgo any sense of a feeling of satisfaction for the European impetus to act. This is critically important. Europe is much stronger than Russia, but the fact that it has not been able to stop Putin yet only proves that it is, to some extent, or it was, a paper tiger. We have to strengthen lots of our policies to really overwhelm the difficulties which we are confronted with. If we do not win the war with Russia, we risk more than just losing Ukraine and its security. We risk marginalizing the entire continent. The world only deals with strong players. Europe must prove its strength. It is our to be or not to be moment. Thank you very much.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much. And let me very quickly, as time is moving on, welcome Matthias Cormann, Secretary General of the OECD. The OECD, a precursor of a founding institution of the Marshall Plan. So we're delighted with your legacy, sir. Mr. Cormann, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Frau Präsidentin, Herr Bundeskanzler, Prime Ministers, Mr. President, distinguished guests, friends of Ukraine all. Our most immediate focus in support of Ukraine, rightly and necessarily, of course, remains on securing a just peace for Ukraine as soon as possible, on Ukraine's immediate financial needs and macro-financial stability, and indeed on keeping the lights on, keeping the heating going and the water flowing, keeping the other basic services going in Ukraine throughout this war, which we, of course, all continue to take for granted. But of course it is right that we must plan and prepare for recovery and reconstruction now, and importantly we must ensure we combine reconstruction efforts with the necessary reforms to help modernize Ukraine. We all want to help. We all want to support the emergence of a better, stronger, more modern Ukraine operating consistent with the high standards expected from a prospective member country of the European Union and the OECD. To achieve this, we will need a better coordinated and more coherent international approach with the EU, the G7, the IMF, the World Bank Group, the multilateral development banks and all relevant international organisations working together in a well-structured, inclusive platform for policy and donor coordination. So I warmly welcome the calls of Chancellor Scholz and President von der Leyen and Prime Minister Šmihal to put the right, inclusive governance architecture in place to support the recovery, reconstruction and modernisation effort. We also need a clear division of labour, which reflects each partner's core strengths. At the OECD, we've been working in partnership with Ukraine since 1991, a partnership which was reinforced and further strengthened at two key occasions. First in 2014 and again following Russia's illegal invasion in February. At the OECD, we have stood and we continue to stand in strong solidarity with Ukraine, and we stand ready to do everything we can to help Ukraine rebuild better. Since the Lugano conference, we have formally welcomed Ukraine as a prospective member of the OECD. We have commenced an initial accession dialogue with the aim to lift Ukraine's adherence to OECD standards and participation in OECD bodies. Ukraine has also formally asked to join the OECD Working Group on Bribery in International Business Transactions and to accede to the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention. As a first step towards adherence to the Anti-Bribery Convention, we have commenced the process for Ukraine to join the Working Group as a participant for an initial 2-year period. We have previously contributed to the establishment of key anti-corruption institutions in Ukraine, including the National Anti-Corruption Bureau, the Specialised Anti-Corruption Prosecution Office and the High Anti-Corruption Court, and we will continue to build on that work together in close partnership with the government of Ukraine. We have established a dedicated OECD Ukraine liaison office to progress our work on supporting Ukraine's reform and modernisation efforts, which we hope to physically open in Kiev as soon as possible. Over the summer, we supported the government of Ukraine in the preparation and review of its national recovery plan, and we are revising and aligning our joint OECD Ukraine action plan with the priorities set out in the government's recovery plan. We are working with the government on immediate support for educational continuity for displaced children and young people, while looking to the future with a project on redesigning Ukraine's education system. And we are also ready to support Ukraine on public governance policies to create level playing field conditions for domestic and foreign firms and investors in areas such as competition, state-owned enterprises reform, the energy sector and investment. We plan to undertake a formal OECD economic survey of Ukraine in order to help identify priority structural reforms for macroeconomic stabilisation, recovery and modernisation. And we're also continuing our long-standing work with Ukraine in support of Ukraine's decentralisation efforts. Pre-war surveys showed us that Ukrainians rated the work of the country's new local authorities positively, and they have proven resilient and very effective in wartime. And we're continuing to work intensively with Ukraine on tax reform as part of the base erosion and profit shifting, and in training Ukrainian judges on fiscal rulings. There is much to be done, as you can see. To optimise the outcomes, we need to do it all together in a well-coordinated and coherent way. We are looking forward to doing our bit, and Slava Ukraine.
Mr. Secretary General, thank you so much. And now by video, we finally welcome our last colleague. UK Foreign Secretary James Cleverly has put forward a video from Lugano to the London conference. This is the bookend of that, so we'll play that video now and warmly welcome Secretary Cleverly.
Chancellor Scholz, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. When Putin launched his onslaught against Ukraine in February, he arrogantly assumed that he would conquer his neighbour within a matter of days. But the people of Ukraine fought back with invincible courage, saving their capital from the invader and defeating Russian advances time and time again. President Zelensky stood up to be counted. Ukrainians stood up to be counted, and freedom-loving democracies around the world came to their aid. Putin's imperial ambition to conquer his neighbour amounts to the greatest possible violation of the international rules that protect every nation. If his aggression were to succeed, every expansionist tyrant would be emboldened to do their worst, and no country would be safe anywhere in the world. That's why we're all determined to stand up with Ukraine's people until they win, and I have not the slightest doubt that they will. Britain is Ukraine's second largest military donor after the United States, committing £2.3 billion this year, and we will provide the same again in 2023. We've committed £220 million in humanitarian assistance since February, and we've welcomed over 100,000 Ukrainian refugees into our country. We have also made £1.3 billion available to Ukraine by underwriting World Bank and EBRD lending and providing £74 million of direct grants to Ukraine's government. But we all share a responsibility to help Ukraine's people rebuild their country after they achieve victory. We know the monumental scale of the task. Every day, the invader is reducing more of Ukraine to ruins, destroying schools, pulverizing hospitals, and wrecking countless homes. As winter approaches, Putin is obliterating power stations and depriving millions of Ukrainians of heat and light. We must use this conference to unite behind Ukraine's reconstruction and development plan, learning the lessons from previous reconstructions and using them to help rebuild Ukraine. And we must take forward that work at the Ukraine Recovery Conference in London next year. International cooperation has helped Ukraine's heroes to turn the tide on the battlefield, and it will be equally essential to help Ukraine rebuild, so that when victory comes, Ukraine's people can thrive and prosper in the freedom that they have fought and died to preserve.
Secretary Cleverly, thank you very, very much for those important words. And of course, this conference is an extremely important stop as we began in Lugano and move to London next year. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand between your coffee break and a family photo, so I'm going to end this very quickly. But I think we've heard today, we've heard about hope, determination, victory, coordination, unity, strength, confidence. These are the words that will enable Ukraine to modernize and fully recover. With your warm applause, please thank our excellent panelists for their remarks. Oh,
thank you. Yes, thank you indeed. From left to right. Please remain seated for a second and follow instructions. Please, for a second, remain seated. Thank you so much, Prime Minister, President, Secretary General. Thank you, Heather, indeed. So before everyone gets moving, there's going to be a family photo now outside, only for the speakers of this conference. If you're not a speaker, please remain seated for just a second.